Welcome to Echoes in the Gallery. I am your host, Susan L. Sistrunk. As an arts educator and professional artist, it is my privilege to bring you my first original podcast set in a series of volumes. Each episode will air weekly on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcasts. Tonight, in episode 26, The Kidnapping of Victoria Graham, we will delve into our new heroine's past, the man who has taken her, and in the final episode of Volume 1, Beneath the Paint, set the stage for the much-anticipated Volume 2, Between the Lines. Let us step into the gallery and begin. Chapter 26, The Kidnapping of Victoria Graham. That was actually the easiest part for him. The action of taking another person against their will had been the most simple thing in the world. He was surprised it had not been more challenging. Truly, it was the planning that was the most thought-provoking element of the deed. How it was absolutely necessary for him to be in exactly the right place at the right time. The man had to manipulate the situation to meet his needs. Every single element needed to be measured to precise specifications. Victoria was his favorite author. Her stories built images like towers in his mind. The man came to need every one of her novels as soon as it was released. The stories were primarily about art crime. Although it was not a subject the man had known much about initially, he had learned. The masters had become enthralling. Oil paintings and sculptures were suddenly magical, and the artists were gods on earth. How were these beautiful images created? The man became a student of Leonardo and Michelangelo. Colors and paint became a daily fixture in life. Art was suddenly everywhere, and Victoria's mind began to intrigue the man as much as her writing did. He became an expert on the life of Victoria Graham. Victoria had studied art and journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. At 25, she had published the first novel of her career with A Missing Rembrandt, and received critical acclaim due to the historical research and invented imagery ingrained in the storytelling. Over the next 5 years, Victoria's books had continued to top the New York Times bestseller list. He discovered she was also a painter. This was not surprising given how much Victoria worked art into her stories. She lived a quiet, private life with a cat and generally shied away from romantic involvement. In his research, the man could only surmise it was due to the fact such relationships would distract from Victoria's writing. And she was beautiful, something he noticed right away. The man was enthralled by this mystical creature of a woman. As he learned more about her, the man began to drive past her home in the hill country of central Texas just to catch a glimpse of Victoria running every morning. The book jackets did not do her justice. What an enchanting human she was. One day, the man found out she had a book signing at a bookstore in Corpus Christi and drove hours to see her. As Victoria read aloud from her most recent work, The Life of an Art Thief, his mind swirled. Magic, flowing from the lips of this angel. Victoria signing books for a long line of fans would come next, and the man made sure he was early in line. This was his chance to speak to her, the author, Victoria Graham. As the line shortened in front of the man, his palms began to sweat. Would he have the nerve to speak to her face to face? At 36, social graces were not his forte. Aside from the infatuation he had developed for this woman, there were no human interactions in his world. Family money was readily available, so a job was not necessary. Until discovering Victoria in her writing, the man had filled his days with the production of model trains. Rooms in the cabin where he lived were filled with small cities and countryside locations, with trains going constantly. Imaginary tours filling the cabins of locomotives and traveling to distant lands in his mind. When Victoria had entered his life through her books, suddenly his life had purpose, meaning above all other things. He even made a model depicting a small village in Ireland she described verbatim in her novel, An Emerald in the Bog, and it became his favorite to pass the time in between rereading her novels. Victoria was his world. And now, finally, the man was about to meet her in person. It would be magical. There was only one lady now in front of him. Beads of sweat began to form on his brow. The man thought his heart would explode from his chest. Surely it was audible to those across the room. His time had arrived. The man smiled his brightest and put his copy of The Lost Catacombs of Vermeer on the table in front of Victoria. It was a first edition of her latest novel. He had made sure to be in line when it had come out in publication. All of his copies of her books were first editions. As far as Victoria Graham was concerned, the man was a bibliophile. She glanced up at him with a warm smile. "Hello. Who should I sign to?" Her left hand poised over the open cover. "Eric. You can sign it to Eric." At the time, the name had flowed out of his mouth, and the man had no conscious idea why. It wasn't his real name. What was he thinking? He couldn't change it now, so he just started rambling. Miss Graham, I've read all your books. You're amazing, a masterful writer, but you must already know this." The words poured from his mouth, and he began telling her everything he knew about the author, Victoria Graham. She looked at him pleasantly enough and smiled. However, as the gushing continued and he mentioned her cat, Victoria's green eyes, framed by auburn hair, began to cloud slightly. The man noticed other people behind the table with her shift uncomfortably. Victoria closed the book, having completed the inscription, and held it up to the man. "Thank you for being such a devoted follower of my writing. I truly hope you enjoy this novel." She was clearly signaling it was time for the man to move on. This was his chance, and he was blowing it. Oh yes, I've already read it. It is amazing. I got the first copy at my local bookstore and traveled all the way here for you to sign it." The book suddenly weighed as much as granite in his hands, and he stammered, Thank you, Miss Graham. You have no idea what this means to me." He lingered in front of the table, staring at Victoria, waiting for her to feel the love and magic the man felt for her. Watching her eyes for a spark of intrigue at this man standing at the table, the man saw nothing except a growing discomfort at his presence. Anger began to swell in place of admiration. From Victoria's side, a lady stepped forward with a forced smile. "Sir, there are others in line. Would you mind?" She motioned to the exit side of the table. "So that was it? No grand spark?" The woman he had thought about, dreamt about, and, in his mind, made love to on countless occasions, was discarding him like he was just another fan? Heat rose to claim his cheeks in embarrassment and shame. Mumbling "thank you," the man moved out of line and looked back at Victoria as he walked slowly toward the door. She was looking visibly relieved while signing the next person's book, and the woman beside Victoria still had eyes on him suspiciously. The signing would be going on for hours. He just needed to be patient and wait. She was working, after all. The man would wait for her to leave. Finally, it was dark. The store was closing. Victoria walked out with the woman who had been at the table with her. It must be her publishing agent. It was now or never. The man got out of his car and approached Victoria. "Miss Graham, I wanted to thank you again and speak with you, if I may." The woman beside Victoria groaned audibly and placed herself between him and Victoria. "Hello. The signing is over and it's time for my client to get some rest. We really appreciate your patronage, but it is late." There was no way Paula was letting this nut job get next to Victoria. Every signing, there always had to be one fan with that screw loose. Without thinking, the man pushed Paula aside. "Look, Miss Graham, I think I'm in love with you. You must realize I am not just some fan. I know everything about you and just love you so much. If you just speak to me for a few minutes, I know you'll realize it too." Paula grabbed Victoria by the arm. "Let's go." Just then, the security guard from the bookstore came out of the building and began walking toward them. The man backed off immediately, turned, and walked toward an unremarkable black Ford sedan. Victoria couldn't be certain of the model because of the darkness. All she felt at the moment was unease. That was the beginning of the fear for Victoria. Following months would include letters, taunts, Victoria moving 3 times, and the loss of 2 beloved animals due to suspicious circumstances. She became a recluse. Only the people closest to her knew it was occurring. A constant unease in her mind. A reason to keep people at arm's length and keep the blinds closed. She even stopped exercising outside, and now, instead of running through the woods, she ran on a treadmill every morning. And that was the last lead the police had. Now Detective Salvador sat at his desk. This woman had no social life, other than her publisher, no close friends, or romantic interest. She had just disappeared, without any trace. The car she had reported had a license plate registered in Arkansas, which turned out to be stolen. Security footage from the bookstore had been less than helpful, but it did give them that. The man was wearing a hat and probably a fake mustache. Fake or not, he could have shaved that easily. He was a large man. That could be helpful. It would probably mean trouble for Salvador, but he had a hunch about the car. Moments later, with an email sent to his superior, Joseph Salvador got in his car and began driving from Austin, Texas, to a little town called Murfreesboro, Arkansas. This concludes episode 26 and volume 1 of Echoes in the Gallery, Beneath the Paint. In 2 weeks, volume 2, Between the Lines, will premiere on Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever you get your podcasts. And for my subscribers of the podcast, don't forget to tune in to special behind-the-scenes content exclusively for members coming this weekend. Until then, thank you for listening. Stay safe and love each other.